In 1990, a teenage girl from Oregon vanished without a trace, leaving her mother and father without answers for over 2 decades. But 22 years later, her father flips through her old high school yearbook, and what he notices in that moment changes everything. The fog rolled in from the Pacific Ocean, cloaking the coastal town of Mornington, Oregon, in its customary morning shroud. Frank Sanders stood by his daughter's bedroom window, watching as the mist swirled around the lighthouse in the distance. The scenic beauty of this small town, with its dense forests and dramatic cliffs overlooking the ocean, had always been a source of solace for him, until 22 years ago, when his daughter disappeared without a trace. Frank stepped away from the window, his gaze sweeping over the untouched bedroom. Everything was exactly as Alicia had left it that spring day in 1990. Just weeks after her high school graduation, posters still clung to the walls. Her desk remained organized with textbooks and notebooks, her closet still brimming with clothes unworn for over 2 decades. "It's time," he whispered himself, recalling the conversation he'd had with his wife, Elaine, the previous night. They had finally agreed that after 22 years, they needed to accept that Alicia was never coming back. Today was the day they would sort through her belongings, donate what could be useful to children in need, and store the rest in the attic. Frank opened the window to let in fresh air, immediately disturbing years of accumulated dust. He sneezed and wiped his eyes, then moved to the closet and began pulling out Alicia's clothes. Each garment stirred memories: her favorite blue sweater, the dress she wore to her junior prom, the faded jeans with patches she had sewn herself. He worked methodically, placing items into different boxes, one for donation, another for storage, a third for keepsakes. When he reached her school supplies, he hesitated. These represented his daughter's aspirations, her future that never came to be. She had been accepted to University of Oregon, planning to study marine biology. While sorting through textbooks and binders, Frank found a book he didn't recognize, Alicia's high school yearbook. Surprisingly, he realized he had never looked through it before in those painful days after her disappearance. Neither he nor Elaine could bear to see Alicia's smiling face captured in those pages, frozen in time with classmates who had moved on with their lives. Frank sat on the edge of the bed and opened the yearbook. The weight of the book in his hands felt significant, as if he were holding a piece of his daughter's life that had remained unexplored. He flipped through the glossy pages until he found Alicia's senior portrait, her smile so bright and hopeful it sent a familiar pang of grief through his heart. 22 years, he whispered, running his finger over her face. "I need to learn to keep you in my heart without this pain, sweetheart." His eyes drifted to the photo beside Alicia's, her best friend, Amy Davidson. Amy's face brought back memories of sleepovers, dinners at their table, the girls laughing and whispering secrets. Frank realized he hadn't heard from Amy in years. After Alicia vanished, Amy visited regularly for a few months. But eventually, those visits stopped. Curious, Frank turned to the section with individual student profiles. Each graduate had a page with a brief biography and personal quotes. He found Alicia's page and read her words, written when she had her whole life ahead of her. "Thanks to Mom and Dad for always believing in me. To my teachers who pushed me to be better, and to my best friend Amy, don't forget to return my copy of The Secret Garden, Classic Illustrated Edition. Old Grandma, I'll love you forever." Frank laughed, a sound caught between sweetness and bitterness. The light-hearted jab at Amy was so typical of their friendship. He flipped to Amy's profile, reading about her dreams and aspirations. Her biography spoke of determination, chasing dreams, and standing up for oneself. Frank's mind drifted back to the book Alicia had mentioned, The Secret Garden. It had been her favorite since childhood. She had collected different editions. Had Amy ever returned it? He couldn't recall seeing it among Alicia's things. Driven by curiosity, Frank began searching through Alicia's boxes of books. The dust in the room made his eyes water and his nose run. So he decided to carry the boxes to the living room, where he could breathe more easily. In the living room, he methodically emptied the boxes, arranging books and magazines on the coffee table and floor. There were fantasy novels, science textbooks, nature magazines, but no illustrated edition of The Secret Garden. Frank wondered if Amy might still have it after all these years. On impulse, he checked the back of the yearbook and found a section where students had written their contact information. Amy had scribbled her phone number with a note. "Call me anytime. BFF." Frank picked up his phone and dialed the number, not expecting it to still be in service after 22 years. As anticipated, an automated message informed him the number was no longer in use. At that moment, the front door opened and Elaine entered, carrying grocery bags from the farmer's market. She stopped abruptly, taking the scene of books and magazines scattered across the living room. "Frank, what is all this?" Her voice was sharp surprise and something deeper, pain. "I'm just going to Alicia's things like we planned," Frank explained. Standing up, Elaine's face hardened. "We agreed to sort and store her things, not spread them all over the house. I thought we were finally moving forward, not living in the past again." "I'm not living in the past, Elaine. I found her yearbook and was looking for something. What could possibly be so important?" Elaine set her grocery bags on the kitchen counter, her movement stiff with frustration. Frank showed her the yearbook. Pointing to Alicia's note about the book, she mentioned a book Amy borrowed. "I was curious if it was among her things." Elaine sighed deeply. "A book. Frank, it doesn't matter anymore. Alicia's books are just collecting dust. We shouldn't bother Amy with this. She's probably forgotten it too. Do you know where Amy is now?" Frank asked, shifting the topic slightly. "Yes, I see her sometimes when I'm in town. She lives in a trailer these days," Elaine replied, starting to unpack her groceries. "I was thinking I might visit her." Frank said tentatively, "Not just about the book. Of course, it's been so long since we've seen her, and she was like family." Elaine stopped what she was doing and turned to face him directly. "Frank, I can't do that today. I don't have anything against Amy, but I'm not ready to see her right now. Last night we agreed to clear things out and let go of hope. Go to see Amy today feels like the opposite of that." She gestured to the mess in the living room. "I'll stay here and clean this up, get things ready for the attic like we planned. If you want to go, it's your choice." Frank nodded, understanding her reluctance. It was a spur-of-the-moment idea. "I'll go alone." Elaine gave him directions to where Amy usually parked her trailer, but warned, "Don't push her too hard, Frank. Alicia's disappearance must have hit her hard too." They were like sisters. Frank gathered the yearbook, his phone, wallet, and car keys. As he headed to the door, he looked back at Elaine, who had already begun meticulously sorting Alicia's books into boxes. He felt a pang of guilt for leaving her with the cleanup, but something urged him toward Amy, toward answers to questions he hadn't even fully formed yet. The door closed behind him as he stepped into Mornington's foggy morning, the yearbook clutched tightly to his chest. Frank drove along Mornington's winding coastal roads, following Elaine's directions to the trailer park where Amy Davidson lived now. The drive took about 20 minutes, leading him away from the town center to a modest area where several trailers were parked along a strip overlooking a wooded area. He parked his car and looked around, trying to identify which might be Amy's. There were about a dozen trailers of various sizes and conditions. Some appeared permanent, with small gardens planted. Beside them, an outdoor furniture set up. Frank approached a man washing the windows of his RV. "Excuse me, I'm looking for Amy Davidson," he said. The man paused, wiping his hands on a rag. "Amy? Yeah, she's in the blue trailer over there. Third one down." He pointed to a well-kept trailer with a small flower bed out front. Frank thanked him and walked over, his heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. He knocked on the door, the yearbook still tucked under his arm. After a moment, the door opened, and there stood Amy, older now, her once vibrant blonde hair streaked with gray. But her eyes, those same bright blue eyes, widened in recognition. "Mr. Sanders," she said, her voice soft with surprise. "What are you doing here?" "Amy," Frank said, his voice catching. "It's been so long. I was going through Alicia's things, and I found her yearbook. It made me think of you. Can we talk?" Amy hesitated, then nodded, stepping aside to let him in. "Of course, come in." Her trailer was small but tidy, with a cozy living area and a few framed photos on a shelf, one of them showing her and Alicia as teenagers, laughing together on a beach. Frank's throat tightened at the sight. "I'm sorry to drop it like this," he said. I saw your note in the yearbook, and Alicia mentioned you borrowed her copy of The Secret Garden. I was wondering if you still had it." Amy's expression shifted, a flicker of something, guilt, fear, passing across her face. "The Secret Garden," she repeated. I don't know if I still have it. It's been so long. Let me check." She moved to a small bookshelf, her hands trembling slightly as she scanned the titles. Frank watched her closely. Sensing there was more she wasn't saying, "Amy," he said gently, "I'm not just here about the book. I wanted to see you, to talk about Alicia. You were her best friend. You meant so much to her." Amy turned, her eyes glistening. "I miss her every day," she said, her voice breaking. "I tried to keep in touch after, but it was too hard. I felt so guilty, like I should have known something was wrong." Frank nodded, understanding the weight of that guilt. "We all felt that way," he said. "But something about the yearbook, about seeing you and Alicia together, it made me feel like there's something I'm missing. Did anything happen before she disappeared? Anything unusual?" Amy sat down heavily on a small couch, her hands twisting in her lap. "I've gone over that day 1,000,000 times," she said. "We were supposed to meet up after she went for a walk on the cliffs. She loved watching the waves, but she never showed up. I thought maybe she'd changed her mind, gone home. But when I called your house, Elaine said she hadn't come back. That's when we knew something was wrong." Frank leaned forward, his instincts tingling. "Did she say anything that day? Anything about where she was going, who she was meeting?" Amy shook her head, but her eyes darted away. She was excited about college, about her future. She was always talking about the ocean, how she wanted to study it, save it. She didn't mention anyone specific, just that she needed some air, some time to think. She hesitated, then added there was a guy, though, someone she'd been talking to. She didn't tell me much, just that he was older, someone from town. She said he understood her dreams. Frank's heart skipped a beat. "A guy," he repeated. "Did you ever meet him? Did she give you a name?" Amy bit her lip. "No." She was secretive about it. Said it wasn't serious. Just someone she met at the library. I didn't think much of it at the time, but after she disappeared, I wonder if I should have said something. I told the police, but they didn't find anything, no leads, no trace of him. Frank's mind raced. The police investigation had been thorough but fruitless. No witnesses, no evidence. Just a girl who vanished into the fog. "Why didn't you tell us?" he asked, not accusingly, but with a desperate need to understand. "I wanted to," Amy said, tears spilling over. "But I was scared. I was just a kid. I thought maybe I'd imagine it, or that it didn't matter. And then, when the police didn't find anything, I felt like I'd failed her. I couldn't face you and Elaine. I'm so sorry." Frank reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay. Amy, you were young. We all did what we could. But this could be important. Do you remember anything else about this guy? Anything at all?" Amy wiped her eyes, trying to focus. "He drove a truck. I think she saw him a few times near the cliffs. She mentioned he worked with boats. Maybe a fisherman or something. I don't know. It's so fuzzy now. But I wish I'd paid more attention." Frank's grip on the yearbook tightened. A fisherman in the cliffs. It was a lead, however faint, something police might have overlooked. "Thank you, Amy," he said. "This means a lot. I need to look into this for Alicia. Can I contact you if I have more questions?" Amy nodded, scribbling her current number on a piece of paper. "Please, Mr. Sanders, let me know if you find anything. I've carried this guilt for so long. I want to help if I can." Frank thanked her and left the trailer, his mind buzzing with this new information. A man, an older man, someone Alicia had been meeting. It wasn't much, but it was more than they'd had in years. As he drove back to the foggy coastal roads, the yearbook on the passenger seat, he felt a spark of hope, a sense that Alicia's story wasn't finished, that the truth, however elusive, was still out there, waiting to be found. "Do you know which trailer is hers?" Frank asked. The man pointed toward a blue and white trailer at the far end of the lot. "That's Amy's place. Good woman. Keeps to herself mostly." Frank thanked him and walked toward the indicated trailer. It was modest but well-maintained, with a small potted plant by the door. He took a deep breath and knocked. After a moment, the door opened. A woman in her early 40s stood there, her blonde hair now streaked with gray, her face bearing the subtle lines of middle age. She looked at Frank with polite confusion, no recognition in her eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked. Frank realized with a start that they wouldn't recognize each other. The last time they'd seen one another, Amy was a teenager, and he was 22 years younger. "Amy, I'm Frank Sanders, Alicia's father," he said. Her eyes widened in surprise, then filled with a mix of emotions, recognition, sadness, warmth. "Mr. Sanders, my God, please come in." She stepped back, opening the door wider. Frank climbed the 2 small steps into the compact but cozy living space. The trailer was neat, adorned with personal touches, small photographs, plants, colorful pillows. "Please," Sit down. Would you like some coffee? Amy gestured to a small dinette. Coffee would be nice. Thank you, Frank said, settling onto the bench seat. As Amy prepared the coffee, Frank noticed her movements were deliberate, almost cautious, as if buying time to process this unexpected visit. What brings you here after all these years? She asked, setting a steaming mug before him and sitting across the table. Frank pulled out the yearbook he'd brought. I found this today while cleaning out Alicia's room. I realized I'd never looked through it before. Amy's eyes fixed on the book. I remember this, she said softly, reaching to touch the cover. Frank opened it to Alicia's profile page and pointed a note about returning the book. I was curious about this book she mentioned. Did you ever give it back? Amy's expression softened into a sad smile. No, I didn't. I was such a forgetful kid back then, and Alicia knew it. She always teased me about it. She stood and moved to a cabinet under her bed. After rummaging for a moment, she pulled out a worn copy of The Secret Garden, Classic Illustrated Edition. I kept forgetting to return it. And then, after she disappeared, I couldn't part with it. It's the last thing I have of her. Amy held the book carefully, as if it were fragile glass. Would you mind terribly if I kept it? It's become so precious to me over the years. Frank nodded, understanding completely. Of course you can keep it. He took the book when Amy handed it to him, opening it gently. The pages were yellow with time, but the illustrations remained vibrant. As he flipped through, he stopped at a page used as a bookmark. It appeared to be a torn-out page from a teen fashion magazine. Frank unfolded it to reveal a photo shoot featuring teenage models. One young man in stylish clothing caught his eye. Something about him felt familiar. Who's this, he asked, pointing to the model. Amy leaned over to look. That's Jason Murray. He was in our class. Frank returned to the yearbook and found Jason's photo near Alicia's. I remember now. He was pretty talented to be modeling at that age. He still models occasionally, from what I know. Now he has his own fashion line, Amy said. Frank looked up. You know, Elaine once mentioned that you were dating Jason back then. I didn't pay much attention at the time. Amy's expression changed instantly. That's not true at all. I never dated Jason. In fact, I never really liked him. He was close to Alicia for a while, though. This took Frank by surprise. Alicia. She never mentioned anything about Jason to us. It was during our junior year, 11th grade, about a year before graduation. Amy explained Jason seemed to have a crush on Alicia for a few months, but it didn't last long once we figured out what kind of person he really was. We both stayed away from him. Alicia never brought him up again. Amy paused, seeming to recall something. Actually, now that I think about it, I did see them talking a few times. During senior year, they seemed close, which was odd because we'd agreed he wasn't a good person. Alicia even asked me some strange questions about him. What kind of questions? Frank asked. His interest piqued. She asked if I thought someone like Jason just needed help to change, if maybe he wasn't as bad as we thought. She even asked me to drive by his house once because she wanted to see where he lived. I thought it was weird at the time, but Alicia always had such a soft heart. She wanted to see the good in everyone. Frank frowned. Did the police know about this when they investigated her disappearance? Yes, I told them. Amy confirmed. They questioned everyone in our class, including Jason, but by then, Alicia was dating Brandon Knox. He was their main suspect at first. Frank nodded. I remember Brandon. He used to come out of the house to pick her up. We suspected him too, but he had a solid alibi for when she disappeared. Do you know what happened to Brandon? Frank asked. From what I heard, he left town soon, after Alicia vanished. The scrutiny was too much for him, I think. Frank's mind was racing, and Jason, what about him? I'm not sure about any relationship between them, Amy said. Alicia rarely showed interest in him beyond those few curious questions. Frank looked again at Jason's photo in the magazine. Why would Alicia have used his page as a bookmark? And the fact that she'd been close to him without Frank or Elaine knowing, that felt significant. He mentioned it to Amy, who said it was from Alicia's favorite magazine. I hated Jason so much that Alicia tore out the page with his face. She just folded it up and said there was nothing better for it than to be used as a bookmark. Frank thought for a moment, then nodded. Do you know where Jason is now? He asked. Amy picked up her phone and scrolled through some messages. Actually, our high school alumni group just had a reunion last weekend at Jason's place. I didn't go, but they shared his address in the group chat. She showed the message to Frank. Would you mind sending me that address? Frank asked. Pulling out his phone, they exchanged numbers, and Amy forwarded the information. Do you think Jason might be involved? Somehow, Amy asked hesitantly. I don't know, Frank admitted, but I'd like the police to know about his connection to Alicia, however brief. The fact that neither Elaine nor I knew about it makes me curious. When Alicia started dating Brandon, it was completely open and transparent. Frank stood, thanking Amy for her time and the information. As he prepared to leave, Amy touched his arm. Please tell Elaine I say hello, she said, and thank you for letting me keep the book. It means more to me than you know. Frank nodded, the yearbook under his arm as he stepped back into the afternoon light, his mind swirling with new questions about his daughter's life and her disappearance. Frank sat in his car, the yearbook resting on the passenger seat beside him, his mind racing with the new information Amy had shared. The revelation that Alicia had been close to Jason Murray, even briefly, was unsettling, not because of Jason himself, but because Frank and Elaine had never known. He pulled out his phone and dialed Detective Ron Keller, the officer who had been assigned to Alicia's case all those years ago. Frank knew the detective had retired but still lived in town. The call went to voicemail. Unsurprising for a Sunday afternoon, Frank stared at his phone, then at the address Amy had sent. He should go home to Elaine. He knew. He'd promised they'd close this chapter of their lives today, but something about what Amy had said in the bookmark kept nagging at him. Alicia's curiosity about Jason's house, her questions about whether he could change, just a quick look. He murmured to himself, starting the car just to see where it is. 20 minutes later, Frank found himself in one of Mornington's more affluent neighborhoods. Large homes with manicured lawns lined the quiet streets. A stark contrast to the modest home where he and Elaine had raised Alicia. He located Jason's address, a sprawling two-story house with a circular driveway and professional landscaping. The property was significantly larger than the surrounding homes. Evidence of Jason's success since high school, Frank parked his car across the street at a distance, observing the house. The front door was open, and as he watched, a man emerged, accompanied by a young woman. Even from this distance, Frank could recognize an older version of the boy from the yearbook, Jason Murray. Now in his early 40s, still handsome, with the confidence of someone accustomed to success, Jason escorted the woman to her car, kissed her cheek, and waved her off as she drove away. When he turned to head back inside, his gaze drifted across the street and landed on Frank's car. Frank realized too late that his car's windows weren't tinted, making him clearly visible. Jason's posture shifted, becoming alert and wary. Frank decided there was no point hiding now. He turned off the engine, stepped out of the car, and approached the driveway. Good afternoon, he called. Trying to sound casual, Jason Murray froze, his eyes narrowing as he studied Frank. Do I know you? He asked, his voice guarded. I'm Frank Sanders, Alicia's father. Frank said, stopping a few feet away. I was just in the neighborhood. Thought I'd stop by. We went to school together, didn't we? Jason's expression flickered, a mix of surprise and something harder to read. Alicia Sanders. Yeah, I remember her. That was a long time ago. What brings you here, Mr. Sanders? His tone was polite but laced with caution. Frank held up the yearbook. I was going through some Alicia's things today. Found this. It got me thinking about her friends, her life back then. I heard you two were close for a while. Jason's jaw tightened slightly. Close. I wouldn't say that. We talked a bit in school, hung out a few times, but that was it. I was sorry to hear what happened to her. Terrible thing. He shifted his weight, glancing toward the house. Look, I've got some things to take care of, but it was nice seeing you. Frank nodded, not wanting to push too hard. Of course, I didn't mean to intrude. Just wanted to connect with someone who knew her. Thanks for your time. He turned to leave, but something in Jason's demeanor, the way his eyes darted away, made Frank pause. Actually, one more thing. He said, Amy Davidson mentioned Alicia was curious about you, asked about your house. He wanted to see where you lived. Do you remember that? Jason's face went still, his voice flat. Amy said that. I don't recall anything like that. Kids talk. There was probably nothing. He forced a smile. I really need to get going. Take care, Mr. Sanders. Frank nodded, sensing he'd struck a nerve. Thanks, Jason. I'll be in touch, he said, walking back to his car, his heart pounding. Jason watched him go, standing in the driveway until Frank drove away. In the rear-view mirror, Frank saw him pull out a phone and make a call, his posture tense. As Frank drove back toward home, His mind churned. Jason's reaction had been too guarded, too quick to dismiss. Amy's story about Alicia's curiosity, the bookmark with Jason's face, it all pointed to something more, something the police might have missed. He needed to talk to Detective Keller to share this new information, but first, he had to tell Elaine they had promised to face this together. And he couldn't keep this from her. The yearbook sat on the passenger seat, a silent reminder of Alicia's life, her secrets, and the truth that might still be waiting to be uncovered. When Frank pulled into his driveway, the fog had thickened, wrapping the house in a ghostly veil. He sat in the car for a moment, gathering his thoughts, then grabbed the yearbook and headed inside. Elaine was in the living room, the boxes of Alicia's books neatly packed. She looked up as he entered, her face a mix of exhaustion and resolve. "How was Amy?" she asked, her voice careful. Frank set the yearbook on the table and sat beside her. "She's doing okay. Lives in a trailer now. She still has Alicia's copy of The Secret Garden. She's kept it all these years." He paused, taking her hand. "Elaine, there's something else. Amy told me Alicia was talking to a guy back then, Jason Murray, someone from their class. She was curious about him, even asked to see his house. We never knew about this, and the police didn't find anything when they questioned him. But I went by his place today, and he got nervous when I brought it up." Elaine's eyes widened. Jason Murray, the model kid, she said, her voice trembling. "Why wouldn't Alicia tell us? Why would she keep that from us?" Frank shook his head. "I don't know, but it feels important." I called Detective Keller, left a message. "I think we need to dig deeper for Alicia." Elaine's face crumpled and she leaned into him. "I thought we were done with this pain. Frank, I thought we could let her go. But if there's even a chance..." She trailed off, her voice breaking. Frank held her tightly. "I know. I promised we'd move forward. But I can't ignore this. Not yet. We'll do it together. Okay, we'll find out what happened, no matter what it takes." Elaine nodded against his chest. "Together," she whispered. For Alicia, the yearbook lay open on the table. Alicia's smiling face gazing out, a silent call to uncover the truth. As the fog pressed against the windows, Frank and Elaine sat in the quiet, their resolve hardening, ready to follow this new lead wherever it might take them, determined to find the answers that had eluded them for 22 years. Jason didn't return the friendly greeting. "Who are you, and why are you watching my house?" he demanded, his tone instantly hostile. "Are you paparazzi? A reporter?" "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude," Frank said, stopping at a respectful distance. "My name is Frank Sanders. I'm Alicia Sanders' father. She was in your graduating class, and she disappeared 22 years ago." Jason's expression shifted instantly, his eyes narrowing. "What do you want?" Frank was taken aback by the coldness in Jason's response. "I heard there was a class reunion here last weekend. I'm just trying to gather information about my daughter. I was told you might have been close to her at some point." "Who told you that?" "Amy." Jason's voice was sharp. "She didn't even show up to the reunion." Frank tried to keep his tone calm. "I'm not looking for trouble, just some answers. It's been 22 years, and we still don't know what happened to Alicia." "Why are you asking me?" Jason shot back defensively. "I was never even Alicia's boyfriend. I barely knew her, and I was never into her. I told the police that back then, and I don't appreciate being questioned about it again." Frank was puzzled by the intensity of Jason's reaction. "I never suggested you were a boyfriend. I just heard you were close at some point. If we ever talked at school, it was probably because I borrowed money from her or needed help with homework," Jason said with a sneer. "I always paid back what I borrowed. There was never an issue between us. I told the police everything back then." Despite his casual words, Frank noticed Jason's body language growing increasingly tense. He was shifting his weight from foot to foot, his eyes darting as if checking for onlookers. "I don't get why you're showing up at my house out of nowhere asking these questions," Jason continued. "I have a reputation to maintain now. I don't want any reporter or the public seeing us together and spreading rumors." Before Frank could respond, Jason turned and strode quickly toward his house. "You should leave." He called over his shoulder. "I have nothing more to say about Alicia Sanders." Frank stood there, stunned by the encounter. Jason's reaction seemed disproportionate to his simple questions. Why would a successful businessman be so defensive about a brief high school friendship from over 2 decades ago? As Jason disappeared inside his house, Frank walked slowly back to his car, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the steering wheel. He felt foolish and embarrassed for coming here, for pushing when Elaine had asked him to let it go. "What was I thinking?" He muttered to himself. "I promised Elaine we'd close this chapter today, not reopen old wounds." He started the car, casting one last glance at Jason's house before driving away. If Elaine knew he'd come here instead of helping with the cleanup at home, she'd be hurt and angry. Frank had let himself be pulled back into the vortex of questions and possibilities that had consumed the early years after Alicia's disappearance. As he drove back toward town, Frank tried to convince himself to let it go. Jason's hostile reaction was probably nothing more than annoyance at having his Sunday afternoon interrupted by a reminder of a tragic event from his youth. Anyone might feel uncomfortable being questioned out of the blue about a missing person case after so many years. Yet something about Jason's defensive demeanor nagged at Frank. It felt excessive, almost panic. Was it just a shock of being confronted unexpectedly? Or was there something more? Frank shook his head, forcing himself to focus on the road. He'd promised Elaine they'd move forward today. He needed to honor that promise and stop chasing ghosts from the past. Yet as he drove back into town, his mind kept replaying the odd encounter with Jason Murray. The man's hostility had been unexpected and unsettling. Frank knew he should head home to Elaine, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd stumbled onto something significant. Almost without conscious decision, he found himself turning toward Mornington's Memorial Funeral Home. If he and Elaine were truly going to close this chapter of their lives, perhaps it was time to consider a formal memorial service for Alicia, even without a body to bury. The funeral home was quiet when Frank entered. A kind-faced receptionist greeted him, and after hearing his purpose, she provided brochures detailing services and prices. Frank thanked her and, with the brochures in hand, returned to his car. As he opened his car door, a flash of movement across the street caught his eye. Jason Murray was heading into a hardware store, then, moments later, reappeared at the checkout, holding a shovel and a small wooden box. Frank froze, his gaze locked on Jason. As he loaded the items into his car, through his rear-view mirror, Frank watched as Jason walked the florist shop next to the hardware store. Minutes later, Jason emerged with a bouquet of white hyacinths. White hyacinths, Alicia's favorite flowers. A chill ran down Frank's spine. It could be a coincidence, of course. Plenty of people like white hyacinths. But combined with Jason's earlier behavior and the shovel, Frank's heart pounded as Jason placed the flowers in his car and drove off. Without allowing himself to dwell on the consequences, Frank started his car and followed at a safe distance. Jason drove through town, then took the coastal highway toward Whitcliffe, an area known for its dramatic ocean views and the few scattered vacation properties along its wooded slopes. Frank kept a careful distance, not wanting to be spotted. Eventually, Jason turned onto a private road leading to a small cottage perched near the cliff's edge. Frank drove past, then parked his car farther up a road where trees provided cover. He watched as Jason unlocked the cottage door and went inside. Minutes later, Jason emerged carrying a 1-gallon container of water. He placed it on a small garden cart alongside the shovel, the wooden box, and the bouquet of white hyacinths. Jason began walking away from the cottage, following a narrow trail toward the cliff's edge. Frank slipped out his car and moved through the underbrush, descending the slope toward the cottage. Staying hidden among the trees, a growing sense of urgency propelled him forward. Frank waited until Jason was a good distance away before following cautiously again. The trail wound through stunted pines and blooming shrubs, eventually opening to a secluded lookout with a breathtaking view of the Pacific Ocean. The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the rugged landscape. From behind a large rock formation, Frank watched as Jason selected a spot near the cliff's edge. The man glanced around cautiously, as if ensuring he was alone, then began digging with the shovel. The rocky soil resisted his efforts, suggesting the ground hadn't been disturbed in a long time. After digging a hole about 2 feet deep, Jason set the shovel aside and knelt beside the pit. He opened the wooden box and gazed at its contents for a long moment. From Frank's hiding spot, he couldn't see what was inside, but Jason's expression was pensive, almost reverent. His lips moved silently, as if reciting or perhaps reliving memories. He sifted through papers in his hands, reading each one carefully, taking his time. Finally, Jason closed the box, but before he could secure the lid, a sudden gust of wind swept across the cliff, scattering the papers inside the box in all directions. Jason cursed and quickly shut the box before more contents could escape, then scrambled to gather the Loose papers had blown across the area. Once he collected the stray papers. Jason placed a wooden box in a hole, laid the bouquet of white hyacinths on top, and began filling the pit with dirt. He worked methodically, flattening the soil and pouring water over the mound to compact it. When he finished, Jason stood over the unmarked grave for a long moment. Then, in a voice loud enough for Frank to hear over the sound of the ocean waves, he spoke. "I think you can keep these memories." Now, Alicia. The name hit Frank like a physical blow. He staggered back, shocked, his foot slipping on loose stones. He braced himself against a tree trunk, freezing and clamping his mouth shut to stifle any sound. His heart hammered so loudly in his chest he was sure Jason would hear it. Jason's head snapped up, scanning the surrounding brush. "Hello," he called, his voice sharp with suspicion. "Is someone there?" Frank held his breath, praying the shadows and foliage concealed him. Jason took a step toward the rock formation, his eyes narrowing as he peered into the undergrowth for a moment. It seemed he might investigate further, but then he shook his head, muttering to himself, "Probably just the wind." He turned back to the grave, giving it one last look before gathering the shovel and cart, then headed back along the trail toward the cottage. Frank remained frozen until Jason was out of sight, his mind reeling. Alicia's name, the hyacinths, the buried box. It was no coincidence. Jason knew something about his daughter's disappearance, something he kept hidden for 22 years. Frank's shock gave way to a surge of determination. He needed to know what was in that box, what Jason was so desperate to bury, but he couldn't act now, not with Jason still nearby. He crept back through the woods to his car, his hands shaking as he fumbled with the keys. He needed to call Detective Keller, to tell someone what he'd seen, but first, he had to get home to Elaine, to share this unbearable discovery. They had to face it together, no matter how painful. As Frank drove back to Mornington, the fog had thickened, mirroring the turmoil in his mind. The yearbook still sat on the passenger seat, a relic of Alicia's life now intertwined with a dark secret. Jason's words echoed in his head. "You can keep these memories now." Alicia, what memories? What had Jason done? Frank gripped the steering wheel, his resolve hardening. He wouldn't let this go. Not now. Not when he was so close to the truth. He and Elaine would confront this together, and they would uncover what happened to their daughter, no matter the cost. When Frank pulled into his driveway, the house was dark, the fog pressing against the windows like a living thing. He grabbed the yearbook and hurried inside. Elaine was in the kitchen, washing dishes, the boxes of Alicia's belongings neatly stacked in the corner. She turned as he entered, her face softening with concern. "Frank, you look like you've seen a ghost. What's wrong?" He set the yearbook on the counter and took her hands, his voice trembling. "Elaine, I followed Jason Murray. I saw him bury something, a box, near Whitcliffe. He said Alicia's name. He knows something. He's been hiding something all this time." Elaine's eyes widened, her hands tightening around his. "What are you saying, Frank? Are you sure? What did you see?" Frank recounted the encounter, the shovel, the hyacinths, the buried box, Jason's words, every detail pouring out in a rush. "I couldn't get close enough to see what was in the box, but it's not a coincidence. He was nervous when I showed up at his house, defensive, like he was afraid of something. We need to call Detective Keller. We need to tell someone." Elaine's face paled, but her voice was steady. "Okay, Frank, we'll call him, but we do this together. No more going off alone. We can't lose each other too." She pulled him into a fierce embrace. "We'll find out what happened to Alicia, I promise. But we need to be careful if Jason's involved. He could be dangerous." Frank nodded, relief flooding through him at her support. He picked up his phone and dialed Detective Keller again, this time leaving a detailed message. "Ron, it's Frank Sanders. I found something about Alicia's case. It's about Jason Murray. He buried something today near Whitcliffe. Said her name. I think he knows what happened to her. Please call me back. It's urgent." He hung up, his hands still shaking. Elaine took the phone from him and set it down. "We'll wait for Keller," she said, "but tomorrow we go to the police together. We tell them everything, and we make sure they investigate. No more secrets. No more chasing leads alone." Frank agreed, pulling her close, the weight of the day settling over them. The yearbook lay open on the counter, Alicia's face smiling up at them, a reminder of the daughter they'd lost and the truth they were now determined to find. As the fog enveloped the house, Frank and Elaine held each other, their grief and hope intertwined, ready to face whatever lay ahead, knowing that this time they wouldn't stop until they had answers. The next morning, Frank and Elaine drove to Mornington Police Station, the yearbook and Amy's contact information in hand. They were ushered into a small office where a young detective, Sarah Monroe, listened intently as they recounted the events of the previous day. Frank described Jason's hostile reaction, the shovel, the hyacinths, the buried box, and his words about Alicia. Elaine added details about Amy's revelations, the bookmark, and Alicia's secret interest in Jason, detective. Monroe took careful notes, her expression growing more serious with each detail. "This is significant," she said. "We'll need to speak with Jason Murray and check out that site near Whitcliffe. I'll also contact Detective Keller. He's retired but consults on cold cases. He'll want to know about this." She paused, looking at Frank and Elaine with empathy. "I know this is hard, but you did the right thing coming to us. We'll take it from here, but I need you to stay safe and let us handle the investigation. No more following suspects." "Okay." Frank nodded. "We just want answers. For Alicia," Elaine squeezed his hand. "We've waited 22 years. We can't lose hope now. But we'll do it your way. Detective, just please, find out what he buried. Find out what happened to our daughter." Monroe promised to keep them updated and arranged for a patrol car to drive by their house regularly for added security. As Frank and Elaine left the station, the fog had lifted, revealing a clear, crisp morning. The ocean sparkled in the distance, a reminder of the beauty Alicia had loved. They drove home in silence, their hands clasped, the yearbook between them, a symbol of their daughter's life and the mystery they were finally unraveling. They knew the road ahead would be painful, but for the first time in 22 years, they felt closer to truth, and they would face it together. For Alicia, for the love that had never faded, and for the justice she deserved. "Is anyone there?" Jason called, his voice sharp with suspicion. Frank remained perfectly still, barely daring to breathe. Jason gripped the shovel and took a few steps toward the underbrush where Frank was hidden. He paused, listening intently, then took another step forward. Frank pressed himself against a tree trunk, praying the shadows concealed him. After what felt like an eternity, Jason stepped back. "Just the wind," he muttered, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. He cast one more suspicious glance around the area before gathering his supplies. Instead of returning the way he'd come, Jason walked the perimeter of the clearing, as if ensuring no one was watching. Finally satisfied, he headed back toward the cottage, the empty water container and cart in tow. He propped the shovel against the side of the house before climbing into his car and driving off. Frank waited, counting slowly to 100 to ensure Jason wouldn't return. When the area remained silent, he cautiously emerged from his hiding spot. His legs felt weak, but determination drove him toward the freshly disturbed earth. He needed to know what was in that box. He needed to know why Jason had spoken his daughter's name over what looked disturbingly like a grave. Frank retrieved the shovel from where Jason had left it by the cottage and returned to the burial site. He began digging, his movements frantic yet cautious. The soil was still damp and easy to move in minutes. He'd uncovered a bouquet of white hyacinths, their fragrance filling the air as he carefully set them aside. Just as Frank's shovel struck the wooden box, a voice behind him froze his blood. "I knew there was someone out there. I was right." Frank spun to find Jason standing a few yards away, his expression a mix of rage and triumph. "You shouldn't have come back," Jason said slowly. "I saw your car parked up the hill, so I looped back to the woods. What do you think you're doing?" Frank gripped the shovel tightly, both as a tool to continue his task and a potential weapon if needed. "I heard you say my daughter's name," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "What did you bury here? Jason, what does Alicia have to do with this?" Jason's face contorted. "You don't know what you're talking about. You shouldn't be here." Frank turned back to the partially excavated pit, determined to uncover the box. "I'm going to find out what's in there." "Stop," Jason shouted, pulling a handgun, dropped the shovel. Frank immediately raised his hands. The shovel clattered into ground. As Jason lunged forward to grab it, Frank swiftly pulled his phone from his pocket with his free hand. "I'm calling the police. They need to see this. Go ahead. Shoot me if you want. I'll be with my daughter again." But I'm one button away from alerting them. With surprising speed, Jason knocked the phone from Frank's hand, sending it skittering dangerously close to Cliff's edge. "No," Frank shouted. He dove forward, kicking the gun from Jason's hand, sending it tumbling over the cliff, then lunged for his phone. His fingers closing around it just in time before it slid off the edge. Without hesitation, He pressed the SOS button, knowing it would alert emergency services and transmit his location. "Stop this, Jason," Frank pleaded, backing away from the increasingly erratic man. "The police are coming, just tell me the truth. Alicia's gone. Nothing can change that now. Hiding the truth won't do anyone any good." "You don't understand," Jason screamed, his face flushed with emotion. "I still have my whole life ahead of me, my business, my reputation. I can't let this ruin everything." "Did you kill my daughter?" Frank asked, directly, his voice breaking. "If you loved her, why would you hurt her? She was my only child." Jason's expression twisted. "I never knew what I felt for her," he admitted, his voice strained. "She should have been more careful, stayed away from me. And if you'd loved your daughter, you protected her better." "What are you saying?" Frank asked, horrified. "You don't understand? You never knew her like I did," Jason said, his words spilling faster now. He gripped the shovel tightly, his knuckles. "White, didn't you see how she looked at me? She kept coming back, again and again. Then why didn't you say anything when she disappeared?" Frank demanded. "Why bury all this here like a grave? She betrayed me in the end," Jason spat, his eyes wild with an emotion Frank couldn't name. With a sudden movement, Jason lunged again, this time knocking Frank down with a shovel and grabbing him by the throat. Frank, older and less physically strong, couldn't break free from Jason's grip. He gasped for air as the younger man's fingers tightened around his neck. Just as spots began to dance before Frank's eyes, the distant wail of police sirens pierced the air. Jason's grip loosened slightly as he glanced toward the sound in panic. Multiple police cars sped up the private road, their sirens shattering the coastal tranquility. Frank gasped for breath as Jason's hold on his throat slackened in surprise. Within moments, officers surrounded them, weapons drawn. "Let him go and step back with your hands where we can see them," an officer ordered. Jason released Frank and slowly raised his hands, the shovel falling to the ground. Two officers moved in, securing Jason's wrists with handcuffs while reciting his rights. Frank collapsed on the ground, coughing and rubbing his throat. "Are you okay, sir?" An officer helped Frank to his feet. "Yes," Frank managed, his voice hoarse. "Thank you." As the officers led Jason to a patrol car, Frank pointed to the freshly disturbed earth. "He just buried something there." He mentioned my daughter's name, Alicia Sanders. "She disappeared 22 years ago." The officer's expression turned serious. "Sanders, I remember that case. Let me call Detective Ramirez." As some officers moved to secure the scene, Detective Ramirez approached Frank and handed him his phone. "Mr. Sanders, I'm Detective Ramirez. Can you tell me what happened here?" Frank explained everything, finding the yearbook, visiting Amy, his strange encounter with Jason at his house, and how he'd followed him to this cliff. "I know I shouldn't have followed him," Frank admitted, "but when I saw him by a shovel and white hyacinths, Alicia's favorite flowers, something just didn't feel right." Detective Ramirez nodded. He said he buried something here. Frank pointed to a mound of fresh earth. He buried a wooden box and the flowers. Before that, the wind blew some papers out of the box, and he gathered them up. He said something about Alicia keeping these memories now. The detective signaled to a forensic team that had arrived. "Let's see what we've got." As the forensic team carefully excavated the site, Frank watched with growing apprehension. The first item they uncovered was a bouquet of white hyacinths, still fresh and pristine. Beneath it was a wooden box. The lead forensic technician opened it carefully, revealing its contents to Detective Ramirez. Inside was a stack of papers, handwritten notes, photos, and what appeared to be printed text messages, all slightly yellowed with time. There was also a small handmade yarn doll, the kind children might craft in art class. "Jason just buried this," Frank explained, "but he said Alicia could have it now, which means he's been keeping these things in his house all this time." Detective Ramirez donned gloves and began examining the box's contents. The first items were printouts of text messages between Jason and Alicia, dating back to their high school days. As the detective read them, his expression grew. "Increasingly grave, Mr. Sanders. These messages suggest Jason and Alicia had a secret relationship during high school," he said softly. "It looks like it was complicated." The notes and messages reveal an obsessive attachment on Jason's part. He was infatuated with her, but she tried to distance herself. There are references to arguments, to her wanting to end contact. Frank's heart sank, his worst fears taking shape. "And the photos, what are they?" he asked, his voice trembling. Ramirez hesitated, then held up a few Polaroids. They show Alicia, some with Jason, others alone, taken at the cliffs near the ocean. She doesn't look happy in most of them. There's also a note here. It's from Alicia to Jason, telling him to leave her alone, that she's with Brandon now and doesn't want to see him anymore. Frank's knees buckled, and he leaned against a nearby rock for support. She was trying to get away from him. He whispered, and he couldn't let her go. What about the doll? Ramirez examined the yarn doll. It's handmade. Looks like something personal. Maybe something Alicia made or gave him. It's worn, like it's been handled a lot over the years. He bagged it carefully. We'll analyze everything. But this is strong evidence of connection between Jason and Alicia's disappearance. We'll need to question him further, and we'll search his properties, including that cottage. Frank nodded, his mind reeling. What did he do to her? He said, more to himself and the detective. Where is she? Ramirez placed a hand on Frank's shoulder. We don't know yet, but this is a major break in the case. We'll do everything we can to find out. I need you to go home. Be with your wife. We'll contact you as soon as we have more. Frank glanced at the patrol car where Jason sat. His head bowed. What about him? Will he talk? Ramirez's jaw tightened. He's got a lot to answer for. We'll make sure he does. We're also sending a team to recover the gun you said went over cliff, and we'll check for any other evidence in the area. Frank thanked the detective, his voice hollow, as the officers escorted him to his car. He cast one last look at the unearthed box, the hyacinth scattered beside it, a symbol of his daughter's life and the secrets Jason had buried. The drive home was a blur, the weight of what he'd uncovered pressing against his chest. He needed to tell Elaine, to face this together. But the thought of her pain, of confirming Alicia's fate, was almost unbearable. Yet he knew they had to keep going, for Alicia, for the truth they'd sought for 22 years. When Frank pulled into his driveway, the fog had settled thickly around the house, a ghostly veil mirroring his turmoil. He grabbed a yearbook and stumbled inside. Elaine was in the living room, sorting through the last of Alicia's belongings. She looked up, her face falling at his expression. Frank, what happened? You're shaking. He sank onto the couch beside her, his voice breaking. I followed Jason to Whitcliffe. He buried a box, said Alicia's name. The police came. They found messages, photos, a doll. He was obsessed with her. Elaine, he might have hurt her. Elaine's hands flew to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. No. Frank, please, tell me it's not true. What did they find? Frank recounted everything, the confrontation, the box, the evidence, the police's response. Every word felt like a wound, but he forced himself to continue. They're questioning him now. They're searching his properties. We might finally know what happened to her. Elaine clung to him, sobbing, our baby. Why didn't we see it? Why didn't she tell us? Frank held her tightly, his own tears falling. She tried to protect us. She was so strong. But we're going to find out. We're going to make sure he pays. We'll do this together. Elaine nodded, her voice muffled against his chest. Together. For Alicia, we won't stop. The yearbook lay on the table, open to Alicia's page, her smile a silent promise that her story wasn't over. As the fog pressed against the windows, Frank and Elaine sat in the quiet, their grief and resolve intertwined, ready to face the painful truth, determined to bring their daughter's memory to light. The next morning, Detective Ramirez called with an update. Jason was in custody, refusing to speak without a lawyer, but the evidence in the box was damning. The messages showed a pattern of obsession and control, culminating in Alicia's attempts to break free. The police had searched the cottage and found more items, a necklace Alicia was known to wear, hidden in a locked drawer, and a journal where Jason had written about his feelings for her, his anger when she rejected him. They were now combing the cliffs for any trace of Alicia, using cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar. Ramirez promised to keep Frank and Elaine informed. We're closer than we've ever been, he said. I know it's hard, but this could give you closure. Frank thanked him, his voice heavy. Closure, he thought, wasn't the right word. There would never be closure, only truth and justice. He and Elaine drove to the police station later that day to provide statements, bringing the yearbook and Amy's contact. Information. Detective Monroe, who'd taken their initial report, joined Ramirez in assuring the case was a priority. We reopened Alicia's file, Monroe said, and we're coordinating with the FBI. Jason's business connections are being investigated too. This might be bigger than we thought. Frank and Elaine nodded, their hands clasped. What can we do? Elaine asked, her voice steady despite her red-rimmed eyes. Keep her memory alive. Ramirez said, share anything else you remember, any. Detail it all helps. And let us do our job. We'll find her, or at least what happened to her. I promise. As they left the station, the sun broke through the fog, casting a golden light over Mornington. Frank looked at Elaine. We need to plan a memorial, he said, whether we find her or not. She deserves to be honored. Elaine agreed, tears glistening. We'll do it right, for her, for us, for everyone who loved her. They drove home, the yearbook between them, a symbol of Alicia's life and the fight they'd never abandon. The cliffs of Whitcliffe loomed in the distance, holding secrets yet to be uncovered. But Frank and Elaine were no longer alone in their search. The truth was emerging, and with it, the chance to finally bring Alicia home, in whatever way they could, their love for her unbroken, their resolve unshakable, ready to face the answers that had eluded them for 22 years. Frank stepped closer to examine the messages. They revealed a relationship neither he nor Elaine had known about. According to the text, Jason and Alicia had gone out with a group of friends once, with Jason specifically asking Alicia not to bring Amy at one point during that outing. Jason had kissed Alicia without her consent. The messages showed Alicia's initial anger, followed by a gradual shift. She seemed drawn to Jason despite her reservations, convinced he just needed someone to love and believe in him. Alicia repeatedly told Jason she believed he could change and become a better person, but Jason's responses were manipulative, exploiting her affection without ever committing to her. This went on for nearly a year, Detective Ramirez noted, flipping through more messages. Then Alicia tried to end things. The later messages showed her growing frustration with a toxic relationship. When she finally broke it off and began openly dating Brandon Knox, Jason's messages grew, increasingly desperate, then angry. Among the photos in the box were several that made Frank recoil in horror. Explicit images of Alicia, taken while she appeared to be restrained. The background showed a rustic interior matching the cottage Jason had just come from, as well as various locations in surrounding woods. Detective Ramirez quickly covered these photos but turned them over to examine the backs. Each had handwritten notes, presumably from Jason, scrawled on the reverse. One photo had the same phrase repeated dozens of times, filling the entire back. You still have to love me. You still have to love me. You still have to love me. Another bore the inscription, had a great time at the cliffs with you. Yours, Jay. The most disturbing was on the back of a photo where Alicia's face showed clear fear. Here, Jason had written a rambling note about how he could no longer keep his composure, that people were looking for Alicia, and that she, referred to an obscenity, refused to talk to him. The note ended with an apology that he had to kill her, because otherwise they'd find her and catch him, adding that she'd always be in his heart, even if no one knew about their relationship. We'll need to question Jason about the details of how he killed Alicia, Detective Ramirez said quietly to another officer. He doesn't say it explicitly in these notes. As they continued examining the evidence, another team of officers who'd been searching the surrounding area approached. Urgently, Detective, we found something, one said, her voice grim. About 5 meters from here, there's an area where the soil composition is different. We did a preliminary dig and found bone fragments. Frank's legs gave out, and he sank to the ground. After 22 years of uncertainty and false hopes, the terrible truth was emerging. The forensic team expanded their search, carefully digging in the indicated area. As the afternoon wore on, they uncovered more and more of Alicia's remains. Detective Ramirez approached Frank, who had been sitting silently, watching the excavation. Mr. Sanders, would you like us to call your wife? She should know about this. Frank nodded numbly, yes. And please contact Amy Davidson, too. She was Alicia's best friend. She deserves to know. While they waited for Elaine and Amy to arrive, the detective suggested Frank might want to wait at the station, but he refused. No, I need to stay here. He said firmly, I need to see this through. We've waited 22 years for answers. I need to see it to the end. When Elaine arrived an hour later, her face was pale with shock. She ran to Frank, and they clung to each other as Detective Ramirez gently explained what they found. Amy arrived soon after, her eyes red from crying during the drive. The three stood together at the edge of the crime scene, united in grief as the full extent of what happened to Alicia was revealed. Elaine turned to the detective, her voice trembling but resolute. We want to move her remains from here. She deserves a proper burial Somewhere peaceful, not this terrible place where he left her. We'll arrange that as soon as the forensic team completes their work. Detective Ramirez assured her it shouldn't be more than a day or two. Amy stepped closer to the skeletal evidence, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Why didn't you tell me? Alicia, we were best friends. I could have helped you. We used to talk about girls who fell for guys like Jason and laugh together. I don't understand." As the sun began to set over the Pacific, casting long shadows across the cliff, Frank, Elaine, and Amy kept vigil over Alicia's remains, finally found after 22 years of searching, waiting, and wondering. "She's coming home," Frank whispered, gripping Elaine's hand tightly. "She's finally coming home." A week later, a small flotilla of boats gathered off the coast of Mornington, just below Whitcliffe. The day was unusually clear for the Oregon coast, with sunlight glinting off the gentle waves of the Pacific Ocean. On the lead boat stood Frank and Elaine Sanders, alongside Amy Davidson, Detective Ron Keller, who had come out of retirement to offer support, and Detective Ramirez, who had overseen the final resolution of Alicia's case. In the boats following were Alicia's former classmates, teachers, and the principal of Mornington High School. The news of Jason Murray's arrest and discovery of Alicia's remains had spread quickly through the small coastal town, shaking a community that had never fully recovered from her disappearance 22 years earlier. Frank stood at the bow of the boat, a small urn in his hands. After careful consideration, he and Elaine had decided against a traditional cemetery burial. Instead, they chose to release Alicia's ashes into the ocean, freeing her spirit from the place where she'd been confined for so long. Today, we gather to finally say goodbye to Alicia Sanders. The minister began. For 22 years, her family and friends have carried the weight of her absence, the pain of not knowing. Today, we lay down that burden and commend Alicia's remains to the sea, where she will never again be bound or restrained. Elaine stepped forward to stand beside Frank, her hand on his arm. Alicia loved the ocean, she said, her voice carrying across the water to the other boats. She was studying to become a marine biologist. She would have loved knowing she would become part of the sea she adored so much. Frank opened the urn, and together with Elaine, they scattered Alicia's ashes into water. White hyacinths followed, tossed from every boat, creating a floating garden on the ocean surface. Amy stepped forward, tears streaming down her face, and placed a worn copy of The Secret Garden on the waves. "Goodbye, my friend," she whispered. "I'm sorry I never returned your book." After the ceremony, as the boats returned to shore, Detective Ramirez approached the Sanders with an update on the case. Jason's confessed. He told them quietly, "He's given us the full story of what happened." According to Jason's confession, he'd held Alicia captive in a vacation cottage for several days after abducting her. He'd been obsessed with her since their brief relationship and couldn't accept her moving on with Brandon Knox. He said he promised to make their relationship official if she'd just break up with Brandon and tell everyone she'd gone on a solo trip to celebrate graduation, Ramirez explained. But Alicia refused. She told him that after years of trying to love him and believe he could change, she'd finally realized he was broken beyond repair. The detective continued, her voice soft but matter-of-fact. Jason said her words cut him deeply, and they got into a physical altercation. When Alicia tried to escape, they fought at the cliff's edge, and according to Jason, Alicia nearly managed to push him off. In his rage, he overpowered her and struck her repeatedly with rocks. When he realized she was dead, he panicked and buried her body instead of seeking help. Amy wiped fresh tears from her eyes. "I remember when Alicia started asking me about Jason, wondering if he could change. I never understood why she was so interested in him when I knew how much she disliked him. I had no idea they were secretly involved." She turned to Frank and Elaine. "I'm so sorry. If I'd known, maybe I could have warned her, protected her somehow. None of this is your fault, Amy." Elaine said firmly, "Jason was manipulative and dangerous. Alicia believed she could help him, and he exploited her compassion." Ron Keller, the retired detective who'd spent years searching for Alicia, shook his head sadly because Alicia never went public with him, and Jason had no record. "We focused our investigation elsewhere. Brandon Knox was our main suspect at first, since he was her known boyfriend at the time. Jason must have just gone on with his life, and no one looked at him again." As the boats docked, Frank gazed at the ocean, where the white hyacinths were still visible, bobbing on the waves. 22 years of uncertainty had finally ended. The pain hadn't gone, it never truly would. but there was a sense of resolution, of closure. That night, Frank and Elaine sat on their back porch, watching the sunset. Elaine had placed a framed photo of Alicia on the small table. Between them, not the formal yearbook portrait, but a candid shot of her laughing on the beach, hair wild in the wind, face full of joy. "I think we can finally move forward now," Elaine said softly, reaching for Frank's hand, not forgetting her, but remembering her as she truly was, vibrant, loving, full of compassion. Frank squeezed her hand. "She was so much like you, you know, that desire to see the good in people, to help them better. And she had her stubbornness," Elaine replied with a sad smile. Once she decided someone was worth saving, nothing could change her mind. They sat in companionable silence for a while, their shared grief no longer a wall between them, but a bond that had endured the worst life could throw. "I keep thinking about how young she was," Frank said finally, "how innocent, despite everything. She believed in the power of love to transform people. It's not wrong to believe in that," Elaine replied. "The world needs more people willing to see the potential for goodness in others." Alicia's mistake wasn't believing people could change. It was thinking she could make it happen alone. Frank nodded, understanding the truth in her words. "I just wish she'd told us about Jason. Maybe we could have helped her see the danger. We'll never know," Elaine said softly. "But I believe, wherever she is now, she knows how much we loved her, and she knows we never stopped looking for her." As darkness fell over Mornington, stars began to emerge in the clear night sky. Frank thought about the journey that had begun a week ago when he found that yearbook. How a simple note about a borrowed book had led to answers they'd sought for 22 years. The mystery of Alicia's disappearance was solved, but the deeper mystery of how to live with loss remained. Yet, for the first time in decades, Frank felt a sense of peace. Alicia had been found. She was no longer lost in the unknown, but part of the sea she'd loved, free and unbound. Frank and Elaine would carry on, remembering and perhaps finally healing. The ocean whispered its eternal song, and in its depths, Alicia's spirit was at rest, her story complete, her memory a light that would never fade. As they held hands in quiet, they knew they'd face the future together, honoring their daughter, their love, and the truth they'd fought so hard to uncover.